they sort of falls into the trap or the narrative that anything comes out from China is a threat.
Why US can do that? They can bring in Chinese EV cars, maybe their EV industry could be better. So Dr. San, we certainly know that you have done some researches on Papua New Guinea, and of course you have some working and study experience in Australia. I just want to know, how do you personally view this kind of logic or this kind of combination of how the Western society, the enterprises or the media, political system, all this kind of coalesce, how they balance will work together, maybe based on your personal experiences?
Yes, I want to say from personal experience, the time when I was in Australia was from 2007 and then to 2013. And I think, personally speaking, I had my best times and years in Australia. And I think that was the honeymoon period, that China-Australia relations. And I think that's the period where Australia perceives that China as an opportunity for China's economy boost. And I think when I actually go back to Australia to work, that was after 2017. China and Australia were going through a very, very hard period. And that was an absolutely different vibe and atmosphere you get. So when I started there, I had the best time. It was all very friendly. You wouldn't be viewed as a spy or someone who's going to threaten the national security of Australia. But
because of your race, at that time, you won't be doubted.
No, I think at that time, from 2007 to 2013, the times that I stayed there, Australia was very friendly and it was very positive about overseas students. They view overseas students, and no matter they're from China, Indonesia, or Japan, or Korea, they are all the same. It definitely is an add-on to Australian multicultural diversity. And Australia values diversity. And that was a whole narrative that I had when I was there. But I think after 2017, Australia went through a very, very different or a shift of narrative about China in particular. So the narrative may not shift towards Korean students or towards Japanese students or Indonesian students, but the narrative about Chinese students, overseas students in Australia was very different. You could read the news and articles about, Chinese students are sort of controlled by the government. And there are taboo about the topics that can be discussed in Australian universities. There was a very hard time between China and Australia bilateral relations, but then you see the narrative about Chinese students changed, which is a very unfair practice towards Chinese overseas students.
How do you view this kind of shift? Why does that happen?
Why did that happen?
Why did that happen?
And I think that's, it's definitely international relations approach towards this question is that, first of all, I think it was a top-down securitization from Australian government. You see that the Turnbull government, Abbott's government, they all had that China is a threat to Australia, especially China is a threat to Australia's national security narrative, start to place in. And then there was channels from Australia broadcasting, like from the media, then from think tank, then from politicians, all point to one direction. China is a threat to Australia's national security. And when the whole narrative is formed from the government to the society, the public's opinion about China changed. And then, of course, you see that their attitudes towards Chinese students changed.
So I just want to dig in.
And I think that, I think that happens to the US as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, I don't know when you were in the States, but
2016,
you would experience the hard time.
That's the time when Trump came in.
Because you definitely had the best time there. You think what essentially, I think, because you asked me why this change happened.
I think that's a really complicated question.
I think, no, but essentially I'll put it into one sentence. And it is that the US and Australia had expectations about China. And they expect China to become one of them. And they realized China has its unique way. And they don't want to do things exactly as they expected. So when the expectation falls apart, they treat China differently.
So I want to change my subject to another one. That's about the data privacy. I want to bring up the news written by the South China Morning Post. It says that after Elon Musk's visit to China in April, Elon said that Tesla has already passed data security assessment, and we clearly saw what happened next, that the Tesla Model Y is being allowed in the government procurement procedure in China. But meanwhile, from the Western side, that we have seen numerous articles or commenting on Chinese cars that they have a bad gate, or saying that the cars could be disabled from remote. And also I had the news right here, that's pretty funny. The Ohio senator said that he posted his concerns requiring the government to ban Chinese EV cars because
I have called for that to stop. I want to make sure that people's privacy is protected, which it won't be with all these Chinese vehicles. I want to make sure that our national security is protected, and it won't be if these vehicles come into the country.
Or he doesn't want the influx of this kind of internet-connected EV cars that may be capable of collecting some data about U.S. citizens. I said the U.S. is making a fuss about this, but we allow Tesla into, we give them land, we give them people, we give them manufacturer, we give them the factories to facilitate Tesla. Maybe at a certain point we saved Tesla from bankruptcy, like maybe in 2016 when Shanghai allowed Tesla into Shanghai, gave them all the benefits. I just wonder why is that? Why is Western world so worried about it?
I think that, you see, I laughed because that whole narrative that you gave me remind me a lot about the whole securitization of China.
Yeah.
So it's not just about vehicles that the US senators worries that we're going to attack them, even including TikTok. TikTok is another huge issue that, that's been brought up by the US Congress and US politicians about the whole data security thing, and as well as Huawei.
Yes.
There are all sorts of rumors about their data and privacy issues. But I think if you look in depth and you examine their data policy, there's no difference between Huawei and other US technology companies, as well with the TikTok and other US operative Facebook. So they are all actually for those corporations, they all sort of, maybe they all have the same sort of law firms and to frame their privacy protocols.
Yes.
But then you see that the criticism towards China falls perfectly into the whole narrative of securitization of every China enterprises. I think in terms of why China is very acceptable and also very encouraging towards companies Tesla to come into China. Whereas you see that this very hostile and suspicious attitudes towards China enterprises in the States, I think that's because China government perceives that foreign investment is a boost to China economy. So we see it as opportunity. Whereas I think for some US politicians or even US public views China enterprises as a competitor and as a threat. They sort of force into the trap or the narrative that anything comes out from China is a threat.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting to me that when China bring in Tesla in 1 year, a lot of Chinese brand just soaring up after Tesla was brought in. Why US can't do that? They can bring in Chinese EV cars. Maybe their EV industry could be better, right?
Yeah, because I think the whole mindset since Trump administration to Biden's administration, they had this all decoupling and then de-risking policy. I think one of their goal or aim is to contain China's high technology development. Of course, EV is one of the areas that they want to stop.
As well as maybe Huawei or...
Oh yeah, of course. Anything that you could become competitive with the US, they want to sort of make sure that the containment is in place. The problem is not to contain a company from China or contain a company from the US. I think it actually needs a bit of a consensus among the government level or even non-government organizations to contain those corporations. Data protection is an issue, not just for government. Data protection issue should be against those people who take advantage of the data, but not against the country or against a company from a particular country.
Yes, it means that if I'm a foreign industry and I want to do business with you, I certainly obey your laws and I put my data on your soil to prevent from threatening the national security. I think that's a really basic consensus if a company wants to do business overseas. So that reminds me of like every time when we saw the news maybe about TikTok, about DJI, about all the Chinese high-tech companies, when they want to go overseas, the U.S. politicians always use this kind of as an excuse, the data security, the threatening to national securities. Are those things like making up? Like, is that a kind of excuse that the U.S. political systems always work to prevent contain Chinese companies?
Of course,
they do that a lot, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a political correctness for U.S. politicians to to criticize anything comes out from China or anything related to China. You can see that debate or that sort of narrative all the time from Washington.
You mentioned about your study experience. How about your working experience? Like, have you been ever overseas with some Chinese companies trying to do business with foreign countries?
Well, when I did my research in Papua New Guinea, I had a lot of on-site visits and talks with a lot of the Chinese companies' managing teams. And one thing I find interesting is that a lot of the Chinese companies, when they go overseas, they actually face a lot more unfair treatment than a lot of enterprises who comes into China. When I had this talk with one of the construction company from China, they used to build office buildings in Papua New Guinea, in Port Moresby. They actually had so many problems with their labor and also with the sort of like the local. They had a lot of obstacles with labor cost, with land issues. Because first of all, with the labor, you could see the criticism from Western media that China companies, when they go overseas, they don't do localization. That means
they don't hire local people.
Yeah,
right?
They don't hire local people. They don't source labor from the local market.
But is that true?
Well, when I talked to the managing team, they told me that they really wanted to have neighbors locally because it's a lot more expensive to bring laborers from China to overseas market because you have to pay for their extra accommodation.
And let me guess, that some of the local people, they are not skillful enough
exactly
to perform that kind of
one
job.
Thing
right?
is their skill, so they might not have the expertise to perform the job. That's one aspect. And with some countries, a very, very big problem they have is about the work ethic.
Okay.
So they may turn up one day and they might don't turn up the next day.
They're having some beers or something.
Yeah, maybe they wouldn't pick up their phone when they don't show up, and they don't have the sort of work ethic to actually, compliant to all the company rules. So that's one thing that China companies have when they go overseas, and that's why they find it's very hard to source labor locally. But still, they're trying to, because with expertise, a lot of Chinese companies actually start to do this sort of training, training schools, and then be sure that they have to equip them with the skills and expertise to be able to perform the job. You have to see it from another perspective, maybe a more comprehensive way, to see why they don't source neighbors from locally. Yeah,
that's why I want to mention about is that U.S. or Western media always portray China, or even the Belt and Road, this kind of national policies, they always criticize it as being a debt trap, or they're trying to exchange the infrastructure for more resources, for more in terms of usage of their exports, their ports or something like that.
Well, I think that's one thing. That's a very, very ancient narrative to say that Belt and Road Initiative is a debt trap. But I think there are numerous articles, even from Western think tank, have already cleared or made the argument that it might not be a debt trap. Like, for example, China has been building infrastructure projects, Pacific Islands. We've been doing it mainly through 3 ways. One is no interest borrowing.
Loans, right?
So that's sort of like an aid.
Yeah.
And then the second is very low interest lending to the government. Yeah. It's sort of like semi-aid and then semi-investment. But then the third way is we do it like the commercial rate of lending. And there are 3 ways of doing those infrastructure projects in Pacific Islands. Yeah. And most of them are actually required by the local governments, especially with the commercial rate, the Chinese companies building infrastructure projects. And I have to say, the sort of debt that created by China is not higher created by ADB or World Bank.
Yeah.
And actually the rate from World Bank or ADB is a lot higher than China's. And one thing that for all those lending that China made, we never had a compulsory protocols written in their contract saying that you have to give me 1% of your GDP if you cannot return the money on time. But I have to tell you, with World Bank, that's written in their contract. And you can see
compulsory.
And it's compulsory. And you have to cut your education spending, or you have to cut your national budget on education or health 1% to return the money to me.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think those lending made by Chinese, the AIIB, is worse than those ones made by ADB or World Bank.
So I think that's a really good answer. And first of all, I just want to thank you for being here. And I'm so enlightened by today's topic. And I just hope you guys enjoy it. And maybe next time we can talk for more about international topics related to China.
Of course.
And thank you, Dr. Shen.
Thank you so much.